Welcome back to season number 3. This is episode number 5 of the Global Radio Ideas webinar series. It's good to see you again. My name is Ken Benson from the P1 Media Group, and we're basically a research, consulting, and insights company and working with radio brands all over the world, as my partner in crime does with Benstown, providing amazing imaging and production to radio stations around the world. He's in Stuttgart, Germany today. Welcome the CEO of Benstown, Andy Sanneman.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us today for today's webinar, How to Create a Winning Playlist in a Streaming and Social World, Part 2. Today we're back and continuing our conversation with legendary programmer Guy Zapoleon. So it's great to have you back, Guy. Guy shared so much last time and we could not really cover everything, so we brought him back for Part 2. Today, Guy will tell us how we should use the tools today, and we had a little chit chat before the show, and Warren G played an integral role in that, and of course the indicators to create a playlist and much more. Plus, at the end, as always, Guy is going to answer your question later in the show. So if you have a question, feel free to type in the chat box, and let's roll.
So by the way, if you missed part 1, you don't need that. That's not the prerequisite to watch this one. You can always go back and watch that one later, either from the P1 Media Group website, or you can go to Global Radio Ideas on YouTube and find it there anytime. So we'll give you just a quick recap of Guy's career, because like last time, we could spend a lot of the show talking about all of Guy's achievements. But he began his career where he grew up in Los Angeles in the music departments of 2 big radio stations back then, KRTH, known today as K-Earth 101, and KRLA. He went on to program winning CHRs in Tucson, Arizona, Pittsburgh, and Phoenix, and then launched America's first hot AC in Houston, Texas. Also served as group program director and consulted some of the biggest CHRs in the world. Most recently, he held the programming and digital roles or executive roles in those positions at iHeartMedia. And today, the semi-retired Guy continues his consulting with Hit Predictor, which we'll talk about a little bit in the show today. And when he's not babysitting his grandson, he's writing several books. So we might hear a little bit about that. So welcome back from the Boston area in Massachusetts, a living radio legend and a music historian, Guy Zapoleon.
Great to be back, Ken. Great to be back at your house.
Oh, good. So another quick recap before we jump into this, in case you missed last time, to catch you up. Guy was, before he got his first radio job, was actually one of those contest pigs we used to talk about. He was in high school in Los Angeles and won a car from Charlie Tuna, the legendary Charlie Tuna on KHJ in Los Angeles, which is amazing. Me growing up in New York, I know when I called WABC, it was always busy because there were 7 million people listening. You had no chance. And Andy, you're younger than the rest of us, but it's very hard to dial fast on a rotary telephone. So
absolutely.
But I did, and that's how I won.
So
you knew the number before. I'm sure you knew the number before.
Yeah, there we go. So a few of the highlights I took away from last time is Guy went on to talk about how radio's made some costly mistakes over the years. And in the U.S. particularly, we began programming to a rating service and stopped reflecting passionate music listeners. This started way back in the 80s. Then industry consolidation that really ramped up in the U.S. in the late 90s led to fewer owners, more homogenous products and conservative programming, many more commercials and ads on the air to pay for that massive debt service, and a de-emphasis of live and local personalities and connections to the community. Yet, the eternal optimist, he says it's not too late to turn things around. Radio is the ultimate personal companion medium, and with a renewed commitment to engaging communicators, great content, and incessant interaction, radio can succeed. And if you work in the pop music world, many of you guys are probably finding this out yourself, but Guy says we're in the worst music cycle for popular music ever. And of course, with all the competition today, it couldn't have come at a worse time. And in the US, if you look at the ratings for CHR over the last 10 years, it's down 33%. And Guy says probably the main reason for this is our obsession with playing pretty much only pop and rhythmic music. And we're playing more than double the pop that appears on the year-end Billboard Hot 100 chart. And as a result, the format is no longer this great variety format it once was. and is missing great songs from other styles like alternative, country,
Yeah.
and more. So what do we do about it? Well, Guy says when CHR is in the doldrums, programmers need to find hits. And Guy was known during these periods when he programmed CHR radio stations to bring records back, records that might have been worked but didn't become hits for whatever reason. Got together with his music directors and found these songs and put them on the radio along with some friends at some other radio stations and made hits of these to help us get us through these long-term droughts of music where it's not so great. So, Guy, does that sum things up?
It does, and when you talk about Billboard magazine and how Top 40 is not reflecting it with its spins, the number one mission of Top 40 should be playing the hits. And by definition, when you're only representing 50, what I've seen of the last 3 years, only 50% of the year-end Billboard hits are in the top 100 of the spins chart for Top 40. So,
Wow.
I mean, that's one of the serious issues that we're facing right now. And speak of the devil.
Yeah, so let's start off with the first question here, particularly about Top 40 radio. How do we deal with the old songs that have become vogue again? And some examples. Last year, there was that TikTok sensation with the cranberry juice video, and all of a sudden, Fleetwood Mac Dreams was exploding on TikTok. Over the last few weeks, we're all aware of this. The new season of Stranger Things started on Netflix, and all of a sudden, Running Up These Hills from, I think, 1985 by Kate Bush is all of a sudden getting played again. So how do stations deal with this? Is this the type of song that, in the doldrums 30 years ago, you would have pulled out and say, yeah, I'm absolutely going to run with this, or do we shy away? And the last piece of the question is, for much of the CHR audience, Guy, these are new songs. They've never heard them before. So what do we do?
So you just gave the answer right there, Ken. Number one, we're in the doldrums, and number two, we need to play those songs as currents if they feel relevant today. And honest to God, I really think the Kate Bush song does not sound. It sounds maybe a little dated, but it doesn't sound so out of whack that it doesn't fit with the rest of the music that Top 40 is playing, and it sounds refreshing. And like we always talk about. Top 40 has to be a variety format, a variety of genres, and a variety of some era variety as well. So anyway, and it is, as you mentioned before, I never shied away from doing a bring back when I felt the current music wasn't that good. And I think that while there is some good current music, there are songs like Kate Bush that are better than most of the songs that are out there. So I would be playing that song, and I would be playing that in a current rotation because you mentioned it's not familiar to most people that are the younger audience of Top 40, and you need to play it and familiarize everybody with it. So, radio really needs to react to huge streaming songs faster and right away because of the impact of massive streaming on a song's lifespan. Look, there's nothing new, but it's something that radio has always gotten away from, and that's jumping on a song that's a cultural event or a social media event. Top 40 was always about reflecting pop culture phenomenon songs of the moment. And you have to seize the moment with a mega streamer before that song is burned out by its streaming exposure. In that case in point, if you can see there on the screen, the first one is a song that drove me absolutely out of my mind that Top 40 radio refused to play. We Don't Talk About Bruno. And it just, I still don't understand it. A lot of people said it was too cartoony, that didn't make a lot of sense to play the song, that it was another Disney song like Frozen, so only kids are into it. But it was a huge number one massive streaming song. You can see that there. That song was number one streaming in January with 30 million streams. And I'll talk about this later, but 10 million streams is the definition of a hit that as I've studied, streaming. If it's 10 million in a week for a couple weeks, you can guarantee that song is going to be a call out hit. This song was number one for 30 million streams for 12 total weeks. So when radio started playing it in they waited till they went to March. You can see 10 weeks in that's when top 40 radio started to say, oh well, maybe we better play this Encanto song. Maybe we were wrong. So they started playing it, and the crazy thing is that people started testing it in call out, and guess what? The song came back burned out. It was like 30% burned, negative for some, and not everyone, but especially in the major markets, like that have probably a little more tuned in audiences. The song was that burned, and you know what that means? It means that streaming has an impact on listening, and people go, well, streaming's not my listeners anymore. Well, it is. It is their listeners, because and I'll talk about this later too, but the majority of people that are radio dailies are also streaming dailies. So if you ignore streaming, you do so at your own risk, because by the time, if you wait more than a few weeks and you see a song that is that magnitude of streaming, you're going to wind up playing a burned out song, and you'll just say, oh, well, you know what? It wasn't a hit. Well, no, you're wrong. It wasn't a hit. You just didn't take advantage of it, and you missed a cultural event song for your format.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the same counts for Kate Bush. I mean, like you said before, and I partially understand like the hesitation. Obviously, we do like a lot of CHR imaging, but you also can position that song in a way that people understand, and that's what we did, for example, with a Kate Bush song on our libraries. We'll basically make the connection to the soundtrack, right? So that people would understand, even that you would understand where it's from. And people who are my age, who might know that song from when they're younger, or recurrence on AC, as a recurrent on AC radio, they would understand, okay, it's back because it's in Stranger Things. And I think that's also like a stylistic approach that you could take as a radio station, is basically position that song in a way that it makes sense and people would understand, even if it's format breaking, which is not, and we all know that, but that's like the argument, I assume.
And I'm not going to name him today, but there's a really smart guy in one of the companies that knew that, and he already produced a stager, and that company is playing the song now with that stager for exactly the reason you talked about, Andreas.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what we did on the libraries too, because I felt it culturally relevant without being a Stranger Things fan, let's just say. So let's talk about playlists. Is it a human curated playlist a competitive advantage for radio versus the streamers' algorithms? Is that something you believe in?
1,000%. I was digital. I was the VP of digital music for iHeartRadio. I was the first person that did it. And while Chris Williams is about 20,000 times better than I was at it, I did do it for a while, and I did work with the algorithm at iHeart. And and I think, look, I'm not going to say that the algorithm's not a powerful thing, because it is. It gets close, but I still believe that the human factor, the human curator, is the best way to produce, a playlist of music or an hour of music, because you have that human instinct, and you see a lot of companies are hiring curators to do playlists for them, whether it's Spotify or Apple or whoever. You have that human touch there as well.
All right, so let's move on, because I don't want to go into a third time and ask you to come back a third time. We have a lot to cover today, Guy.
Shut up.
So back in the day, when we were all in weekly music meetings, it kind of went down like this. The team would come in, we'd listen to some new songs, review the request logs, might have some local sales data from SoundScan, or the old days even calling record stores. And if you were a big station, you probably had call out, which you likely relied a lot on. Well, we know the game has changed dramatically in recent years. Stations have more figures than ever to analyze, mounds of streaming info, Shazam figures, there's TikTok breakouts, and tools like your hit predictor. So my first question, how would you prioritize all this data and data sources to use it to build your weekly radio playlist? And second, is passive research like call out still how important of a tool is it in this new mix of data?
Okay. Well, number one, and I'll move through this fairly quickly. I just think it's a tough time today for radio programmers. So I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that you should be, that you're at fault for not spending the time on music that we used to do, because the job is 10 times tougher than it used to be. I mean, today you're managing an air staff, managing promotions and marketing, sales visits, social media strategies, often doing an air shift, working with other radio stations, or other company initiatives. So you have a fraction of the time that we used to have to listen to music. However, music is still, to quote the amazing John Coleman, the base of our station image pyramid. It's the main reason people listen to a music station. It's the music. So, luckily I had just the most amazing music people, I think, ever in one radio station during my 5 years at KZZP. Besides Steve Goddard, we had K-Rock's Kevin Weatherly was my music director, Gene Baxter of Kevin and Bean, who was also a great music person, Darcy Sanders, legendary, and two teacher program directors, Todd Fisher and Michelle Sanasuso. That was my team. And each week we looked at the new releases from big and small labels. We looked at album cuts, soundtrack hits, imports, and yes, even the aforementioned bringbacks. And whatever it was, we figured we were going to pick the best song. Didn't matter if it was on the chart. We thought, it was up to us to pick the best music for KZP. So we didn't follow the charts. We often waited on songs we felt were mediocre till they were actually top 20 or even close to top 10. I know it's a different world now, but that's what we did. And we didn't follow the charts for dropping a song. We all had our own local call out. We had a great call out department, and we followed it, not the chart. We gave a new song as long as 6 weeks, sometimes even longer, to make sure that we gave it every opportunity and every bit of exposure to make sure that it got a fair shake in the call out. And, playing these songs instead of depending solely on the label priorities, that acted like a secret weapon for KZZP and my future clients as a consultant. And it kept our hit quotient higher for my radio station than the competition, and that got my station higher ratings. So we always believed that making the music the best it could be was job number one for us. So here are the tools that I believe are most important in setting up your research and setting up your rotations. Number one, because music call out of how it's set up, it's still the most accurate representation of your average radio listeners. It's still based on your target audience by age, sex, race, your station's fans, and your cumulus from your competitive stations. So music call out is still keen when you're doing the most important categories. Not all the categories, your most important categories, namely your powers, and those are what I've always called spokes. It's still the most dependable indicator for telling you what the true hits are for the radio audience. Again, for the radio audience. As far as current music, I always made sure programmers are conservative with spokes to make sure that they are super strong with both core and cume, so they can support each music hour to make sure your brand is the strongest it can be. Also important to ensure that you can sandwich newer and developing songs in between those. Having spokes every other song trains your listeners to your radio station to know that if the current song you're hearing, that they're hearing rather, isn't something they like, the next will be so they keep coming back to your station. One thing I'll say about call out is I used to be a big fan of potential scores. I'm no longer a big fan of potential scores, because outside of a song these days that hits the top 10 when you rank your songs by potential, it's really not a real great indicator of what the future is going to be for that song anymore. Instead, so what I use are streaming, Shazam, sales, TikTok, as well as Hit Predictor as your predictive measures to tell you if a song will be a hit eventually in your call out. If you give that song enough, again, important, daytime spins, and importantly, for enough weeks. But, we can't say the old rule of using 150 to 250 spins for a song to become familiar on your station to test and call it. No, we did a few years ago is enough anymore. And after we used to do that, we gave a song a few tests to give a good read on it. Today, you can't do that. We know there's obviously been a migration from radio to streaming only, or at least radio plus streaming. So after COVID in 2020, radio habits changed. I'm not telling you something you guys don't know. Even more dramatically, it's changed. And we know now that people listen even less than when streaming first impacted radio listening. Listeners are spending less than half the time with FM radio today, and it takes at least double the amount of spins for a song to be familiar. You know, you got to remember that the average radio listener listens probably 15 to 30 minutes a day, and that low level listening makes up 70 to 80% of your ratings. So you need to give a song spins every few hours, again, especially during the day, each week, often for 8 weeks even, to make sure that they're exposed enough to reach all your listeners. And then you have to be patient with your call out, not knee jerk to a one bad week of early call out. Give the song a chance. Don't give up on a song until it's 85% familiar for multiple weeks in a row. Then you can judge whether the song is going to be a hit for you. So, streaming, I'm a big fan of looking at Nielsen streaming to create rankers because it can create rotations because it combines all the streaming giants. We know how critically labels care about streaming since it often makes up as much as 80% of the revenue, and Billboard's chart bases around 60% of its calculations on streaming, 30% on airplay, and 10% on digital sales downloads. Yeah, I got that formula from somebody who knows. We all also know that there's a flaw in streaming, and that one person can stream a song up to 50 times a day, and that 350 streams, and that means 350 streams a week. And that really can affect the chart if a large fan club, like 6ix9ine, you know, going back a few years, decides that fan club wants to help their artist make it to the top of the streaming charts. But, you know, look, Nielsen does, after 6ix9ine, does realize that was an issue and is more cautious and careful about looking for hype. So these riggings of the chart are rare, but they still happen from time to time. You know, here's an example. 1 million passive listeners who stream a song once during a week would give you the same number of streams that 2,800 active listeners streaming 350 streams a week did. 1 million versus 2,800. Okay. So continuing on that theme, we know that a major superstar can drop an album and create havoc on the chart because of the streams of their fans. Case in point, a couple weeks ago, Kid Leroy's Stay had been consistently top 10 in national streams for weeks for 2 consecutive weeks, it had nearly 11.9 million streams, but it dropped from number 10 one week to number 20 because Future had just dropped his new album and 16 Future songs debuted from number 1 to number 34. So everything that had been in the top 40 was pushed out, or a lot of them were, or took big drops in the top 40. So, you know, when you have huge streams for every track, you know, again, it pushed everything out. So, you know, nevertheless, we certainly know that streaming, and I want to insert, that's why it's important to look at the streams, and I'll get to that later. Besides the rank, look at the actual streams, because those streams are meaningful, you know, and they may be a lot less because a superstar hip hop artist or you know, a superstar artist drops a new album, you know, and everything kind of pales in comparison to that artist's songs, but that stream number may still be, you know, a 10 million stream, and it's still powerful. So streaming is the most popular way to consume music. And, you know, I mentioned before, you know, it's actually 60% of radio listeners stream music daily. So daily radio listeners stream, 60% of them stream music daily. So once you understand, it's so incredibly important to look at streaming for projecting a future hit for radio, and looking at all your categories with it, except for your power currents, your recurrents, and your gold, which are the spokes that I mentioned before. I also love what Matt Bailey from Integrate said a few weeks ago in an article, that it's important to think of streaming charts as plays, not people. I think that was brilliant, because streaming charts are a combination of both active and passive people, like I explained before. So, yeah, very important. So, like I mentioned before, look at the actual streams from week to week. Don't just look at the ranker, and look at streaming in a 4-week trended chart as well. And that's going to help you understand the staying power of a long-term hit. We know from looking at research that the songs that are most popular in streaming, as well as Shazam, as well as sales, are 6 weeks ahead of the average radio listener. 6 weeks. Streaming is a great companion tool for doing current rotations for radio and a great tool for seeing songs that will become the biggest hits for music consumers. And if they're big enough, they will be the biggest radio hits. If a song is a pop hit or a melodic hip hop hit or a more mainstream country hit even, or a melodic rock hit, its performance in the streaming chart is predictive of how it will do at radio. As I mentioned before, and we can look at the next slide about the 10 million. There it is. Okay. That if a song streams 10 million for a couple of weeks nationally, 80% of them become power type songs. Okay. 80% of them if they stream over 10 million streams. Okay. So, you really need to examine where a song peaks in streaming, even though it's weeks ahead of your call out. If you grade it on a scale, you'll see how amazingly close it'll be where your call out peaks in a few weeks. Not then, but give it 4 or 5 weeks, it'll peak, in that top 10 range I mentioned before. So, and I'll get into that more when we do rotations. Also, I'm a big fan of Shazam. Okay. I've always thought it was an incredible tool. I began trending it for iHeart when I was there, and we all became fans of it. It's really a powerful tool, and it dovetails with streaming because oftentimes, if you see it do well in streaming, you see it do well in Shazam, and you see it do well in sales, and I'll get to that later. You got a hit because you got it across multiple platforms. So top 10, top 15 songs are generally hits for top 40 radio, and it's a little more balanced often than streaming with rock, pop, and hip hop and country, and so it reflects the radio genre diversity that's a little better than streaming does.
That makes sense, right? Because if you're streaming, you can look at your screen and see what the song is, but on the radio, in a lot of cases, in a lot of stations, you don't necessarily know.
Absolutely. And people go, oh, it's Shazam's just for identifying songs. No, it's predictive. If you really study it over time, and I've studied it for, whatever it is, 10 years, you see how predictive it is. It's top 10, top 15. It goes, if it does that and it's there for a couple weeks, then usually that song's a top 40 hit. So
I agree with you, Guy. I mean, to me, it's like people like it enough. They want to know what it is, right? They're taking a moment to figure it out. It's like asking for the order almost, right? You brought them along, and now they're asking you the question as opposed to us just feeding it to them. So,
yeah, exactly. And breezing through this, I still believe in digital single sales. You have to look at it for a couple weeks. If it's top 10, for a couple weeks, and you have to kind of look for those things, just like with streaming, where a fan pushes the all their songs in the top 10. But if the Kid Leroy is there for a couple weeks, you knew Stay was going to be a hit, and it was going to show you that first in sales, sometimes faster than streaming and Shazam, to be honest. TikTok's trending 10. I look TikTok. I listen to it on Sirius XM. A lot of the big hits work there first. We don't talk about Bruno, which should have been a hit. ABCDEFU by Gail. Just a lot of them, start there first. And I do believe in Hit Predictor. I helped design it with my partner, Rick Basiglia. It's been accurate, and especially in all formats, but especially top 40. It's built to look very similar to Call Out with a 1 to 5, scale. And it's been like 70% accurate. So I've always been a fan of that. And we're even developing a new feature called Mega Hit Predictor, which is based strictly on streaming fans only. And I think that's going to be a real advantage in predicting hits earlier. Finally, I use Media Basis chart as a guide, but like I mentioned to you, you can really get sent off the rails by following the charts. It's based on current recurrence. That's how I like to rank it, because recurrents are often still being played as currents by people. So when I see a recurrent as top 10, or actually top 30, it means that the recurrent is being played as a current and should be considered as a potential power. Let me rephrase that. If it's top 10, it's a potential power. If it's top 30, it means that probably some people are still playing as a power, but it's probably better as a down power recurrent. But still, it gives you perspective. But as I mentioned before, don't rely on the charts, especially don't rely on them to drop a song early, because we know that streaming, the charts are based on streaming, both Spins charts and Billboard's charts. And often a label allows a song to peak on top 40 charts and move to recurrent based on whether it's peaked in streaming, because they don't care about it as much anymore, because most of their revenue comes from streaming. So when that song is often moved to recurrent, that like Levitating by Dua Lipa, for example, that song should still be played as a current hit and still should be developing to be a hit for radio. So basically, in conclusion, it's important to identify the right new songs, continue to give them enough spins to make them hits, because most songs, if they're mass appeal enough and have strong streams, will eventually test well and call out if given the spins and the daytime exposure. Look, there are a lot of great ears in radio, and I say listen to your ears and your gut after picking the song you believe in. However, if for top 40, your ears are telling you that AC or country or pop alternative or melodic hip hop and R&B song, which a lot of radio avoids, aren't hits, and you're seeing huge streaming data or other data, you're making a big mistake not playing it. Follow the data, play the hits. Don't rely on the spins charts to be the final gauge of what hits are when a song is moved to recurrent on that spins chart, as they are based so much on streaming, which is up to 6 weeks ahead of radio. So top 40 needs to look at a combination, and this is the next slide here, needs to look at a combination of 4-week trended charts, 4 weeks of trended charts for streaming, for Shazam, for sales, for TikTok, and for Hit Predictor to judge a new and developing song for any song that's not a power, any song. And be careful trying to judge a new song too early based on call-out reports.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you have some strong feelings about this guy, and this was basically a master's class in the first half of a music meeting. So thank you for
that. Nobody ever called me opinionated.
So you're opinionated in a very soft way. So, but the underlying message is firm.
Yeah, you can't compare it with like Ken Benson opinionated. So can you give us a really short example on how you would, and I don't want to like stress like the 40-minute mark, but I really think it'd be interesting to see like how you use these tools to create an actual week's music rotation for your station, right? Like how would you use those tools? And you kind of like gave the answer before roughly, but like go a little bit more in depth. Like where do you feel like how could you use those tools efficiently?
Okay, so I'll try to speed through this because I know we're running out of time. And we'll go to the category slide. Okay, so look, like I mentioned earlier, the spokes are the most important ones to use your call out in, and I do look at call out somewhat for the ones that are in red, the sub powers, the mediums, etc. But I am real rigid about it when it comes to call out because I still think it reflects the average Joe and Jane listener. So, and I will also warn you that I believe sometimes I've kept songs in rotation, up to 3,500 spins. And if it's still like top 7 in your car, I'd still make it a power. Even if I move it to down power and bring it back, which you'll see I do later on in this example. If it's that much stronger, I'm going to put that back, because your spokes have to be strong. They have to be the support mechanism, so you can play other songs in between. If you play 2 or 3 bad songs in a row, you all know people leave. They leave anyway. They punch around, but they're going to punch around a lot more if you play a bunch of undeveloped songs in a row. So quickly, I'll give you an example. I've color coded everything. So green, and maybe go to the next slide to the categories. Like looking at call out, and some of these other metrics, green is super strong, blue is good, yellow is fair, orange is weak, kind of fair, medium weak, and red is bad. So, but a red score could be unfamiliar. So, that's also something to take into example. And I've also color coded the streaming, so that you'll see the green. Anything over 10 million is green. Blue is something between 7 and 10. I consider that good. Fair is like 4 to 6 million, and below, and that's kind of a brownie yellow color. And then red is below that. So anyway, so quickly. Looking here, I looking at the call out first. Both Lil Nas and Justin Bieber had good scores, but they have reasonably high spins. So they're not quite as strong as they were. And I saw Lizzo there in B. It's got a huge stream peak of 20 million. It's number 9 in streaming. It's 4 in Shazam, 4 in sales, as well as having strong call out. I'm going to move that up to A this week. And that's going to be the only song I use that I move to A. Okay. And then you see Lil Nas and Bieber are going to move to D. That's the down powers. Next, you see Doja Cat, which has got a lot of streams. I'm sorry, it's got a decent call, but it's starting to fade. So I'm going to move that to an R. It's not quite as strong in some of its metrics as the Lil Nas and Bieber. You look at the medium category. I am going to move Doja Cat into B, but I don't think it's strong enough to move to power, because some of the other metrics aren't incredible. I mean, it's not top 10 in Shazam. It was number 1 in TikTok, but it's actually starting. Its streaming is pretty low, which concerns me. So I'm going to move it to B, because it's got a good call out score, but that's it. Okay. And Behold, I don't know, Numb Little Bug, Megan Thee Stallion, they're all fine and medium. And Imagine Dragons is fading fast. So that's going to move down to R, because its call out scores not as strong as what we've shown before. So next slide. Okay. And you would say, Kate Bush, why aren't you going to put that to power? Well, it's got great call out. It's got great streaming, but I am going to be a little conservative, and I probably would move that if I got a second call out that was that strong. I'd probably move it to power, but I don't like to put songs into power that have less than 200 spins. I just, again, for that familiarity, because whenever you see call out, sometimes there's still people out there that are even more conservative than what call out indicates. And I just like to be very conservative with my spokes, my powers. So I'm going to leave it in B for a week. Even, like I said, it may be a power next week. Harry Styles, that can move to medium. It's got a decent score and it's got some pretty good streaming in Shazam. J.R. Choi is the strongest of the news. I'm going to move that up to medium as well. Shawn Mendes is falling apart. You can look at its streaming rank at 678. That's been given, enough spins and it's not coming through, so I'm dropping it. Lady Gaga, hopefully that comes through in the next few weeks, but it's a little slow. Nikki Ure looks decent, and I'm moving that to a new instead of night new. And Post Malone is shaky, so it's dropping in streaming. And it looks like people are kind of embracing the new one instead of that. So unfortunately, we're going to move that one out. And then look at the ads. There's some great new songs that are coming up down the pike. Harry Styles looks great. It's got really good streaming Shazam and sales. I'm moving that to C. Dua Lipa looks okay. Good enough, better than what we have in Night News, so moving that in there. Lauren Spencer, that's had some good things about it, especially hit predictor scores. Moving that to Night New as well. The new Halsey looks really, really good in sales and has a good stream peak at 6 million. And then this Joji song, which is really out of left field, had an amazing stream week, and it had great Shazam as well, and it had good sales, and feel really good about that. And I'm going to move that to N, but if it has another good streaming week like this, I might even move that to C because that's very impressive.
Number one on Spotify. That was the number one. I prepared for that meeting today. It was number one on the Spotify chart, global top 50, number one.
Good for Joji. No, seriously. I mean, it's cool. So those are the kind of things you need to be aware of. And you also need to be aware of the streams, because if you don't, that could be one of those songs that burns out before radio decides to deal with it. Wow. Anyway, next slide, and I'll finalize with this. There's one more A. What did I do? Oh my God. I moved Glass Animals. What have I done? I moved Glass Animals back to A. But like I said, I mean, look at where it's streaming. This is after 2677 spins on this particular radio station. It's number 10 in streams. It had a huge stream rank. It's number 34 still in Shazam. It's 34 in sales. It was big at TikTok, and even though I had it as a recurrent, and it's still recurrent on the chart, I'm moving that sucker up to A because that's stronger than anything else that I had to put in there. And like I said, you got to be able to depend on those spokes to keep people listening. So that's it for the rotation part of this.
Okay, Guy, quick question here from Tanya Bird, and I think it's important, and I also want to add to it. Sure. But her question is, would you apply these rotations to adult R&B or mainstream urban? And then my question would be, just so people don't look at you as the master and say, Guy Zapoleon said to do this, I need to do this, even though it may not be the right thing for my market. And I'm sure there's some guys in some parts of the world, as you know, we have representation from all over the world today.
Yeah.
They're looking at the power rotation saying, he's telling me to go to 130 times a week on the A's. So can you just maybe clarify that so we don't send people down the wrong path?
You have to understand your market. Every market and every country is different. What I did, I consulted in Australia, I consulted in Berlin, and at NRJ in Paris. I mean, you have to adapt, and small markets as well. You have to adapt your spins for that marketplace. If you're not New York City, you're not going to necessarily want to spin your songs at 130 spins. Some people have, go every hour and a half or every hour and, whatever, because they don't want to burn out their songs. So every market's different. You have to custom develop your rotations for your market and your listeners and your radio station and your format as well. So, yeah, so you can't just take what I'm telling you and just plug it in. But it's common sense.
Guy said so. I'll spin it like Guy said so.
Don't do that, please. Oh my God, please don't do that. It's common sense, folks. It's common sense. You understand your target listener. period. Do your research, find some way, or do your own research. People like Ron Jacobs used to go to the darn DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and talk to people there, so he understood KHJ back in the day, or KGB in San Diego. I mean, you can do your own research, but don't knee jerk without understanding your target.
I think that leads us beautifully, Ken, to the part where people could ask questions. I'm more than happy to skip the imaging question because we kind of like touched on that a little bit at the start, that you can package songs differently if you feel it might be dangerous to add it. So I think it'd be great if we could like answer some question, Guy, if you're up for that, because there's a lot of questions out there.
Uh-oh.
All right. So let me start it off from Zane in South Africa. What about classic hit stations? Should they be looking at streaming, Guy?
I think if a Kate Bush is streaming in South Africa, then you need to be aware of that. I actually had a friend of mine who programs a classic hit station recently, a very well-known music writer and genius, asked me what I thought about it. And I said, what would I do with Kate Bush? I said, I'd be playing that as a secondary. It's not a spoke, but I'd be playing that as a secondary where it's protected, and I'd be playing it fast because, even though your classic hits audience is slower, you're going to have that streaming have some impact as well.
And they still watch Stranger Things on Netflix. And I think it's also coming down to the packaging here. Like you can, for classic hits, I'll just package it differently than for See a Child. Basically say, as you heard it in the 80s and now back again on Stranger Things, here's Cape. I mean, it's very easy to package those songs, in my opinion, and make it relevant for the target group. I think that's a fair play here, especially if it's a song in the 80s. I mean, most classic hits play 80s meanwhile, right? So there's a lot of classic hit stations that play even 90s almost.
Nothing's more powerful. I'll just say this, the research that Ken does, we did that. We were so cautious about research and what we did in all our radio stations. When Steve Rivers and I launched WKTU, we must have, and Scott Ginsburg and Jimmy DeCastro were on my case, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work. We did so much research to make sure that we were 1,000% sure what we were going to do before we launched WKTU. And so nothing's more valuable than research and understanding your music. Nothing. I mean, it's worth its weight in platinum, in zirconium. So,
but along with some gut too, if I were programming a classic hit station over the past month, I would have upped the rotation on Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone, because it's all over Top Gun again, right? I mean, it makes sense. It's sometimes we overthink things or get too stuck in the numbers and don't think about the art and the piece the programmer should bring to the equation. So another question, this is from Orlando Davis in Tampa, Guy. Is the Doja Cat Get Into It being a fifth single a reason the streams are slower? Does that affect hit potential or strengthen it?
Probably a little bit. Because it may have had that huge launch, when Doja dropped her album. But I still think streaming's, looking at that streaming, you see other Doja Cat songs exploding and streaming. And, so I still think there's validity in looking at the peak stream as well as the streaming track record for that song. But yeah, I think that there is some burnout if somebody's totally into the new album and may have already spent a lot of time with, Get to It.
I would have a question, Guy, there too. Like, obviously, like I said, I prepared a little bit by analyzing Spotify and like some of the media base that we work, Nielsen that we work with. And like what happens, for example, and Drake dropped the new album, we touched base on that a little bit before. So basically the highest streaming rank is not the single drop. So would you then, and that's basically kind of like what Orlando said, just asked just different, like, would you play like the single or would you play both, or would you play the highest streaming song? Because like they have I don't know the song top of my head, but it was very obvious that the highest ranked song was not the single from that album.
There's a brilliant programmer in iHeart. The guy's name is Mark Adams, just an absolutely brilliant he's way ahead on understanding the value of streaming. Over most people that I've ever talked to about it. And when a new album came out, he said, I'm gonna play all those songs, and I'm gonna expose them, maybe a little more at night, but I'm gonna expose them on my radio station. And when the moment is passed, and that's where your programmer instinct comes, you don't play them all. But we did that at Z100. We would, if somebody dropped a new album, what we often would take 2 or 3 songs from the album and play them in a packet and play them, throughout the day for a week or two, because we wanted to seize the moment. And we did that. We've done that ever since. I just retired, from doing that. But we did it. I mean, that's been part of what Pullman and Mark Medina and whoever else have done at that radio station for 20 years.
Yeah. So we have another question. This is from Greece and wants to talk about the elephant in the room. We touched on this a bit earlier, but with labels buying streams, do we really trust the streaming charts?
Well, I kind of covered that earlier a little bit. I think that companies like Nielsen are cautiously confident that they're catching people trying to have people just hype the streaming with their radios pushed up against streaming services on a song, or playing it over again over and over again. So I do trust the streaming services. I'm not going to say there's not hype, but I think Nielsen's pretty good at catching it now.
I think it's important to see the tendency, right? I mean, you don't have to, like you said, I think the sentence that stuck in my head is that's like individual plays and not listeners. And I think that's the tendency, basically, is more important than the actual number, right? Yeah. I mean, of course, you can manipulate that, but it's not going to be reflected on all the streaming charts, plus on Mediabase, plus on Shazam, plus on all the tools that you mentioned before, HitRanker and so on and so on. So the tendency, I think, is relevant here, right?
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of dependency, that's why I kept saying, look at 4-week trends. Right. Take the data and the ranks and trend them. I do that for every one of those platforms. Streaming, Shazam. Streaming comes like that with Nielsen, but I do it with Shazam. I do it myself. I do it with TikTok, with all those tools, because you want to see dependability and consistency.
Or you just play Warren G in every format.
There you go. Perfect. Put Regulate and then play California Love. And but that's why when you talk about Drake, because I didn't finish answering that, if Drake has another song that's a single number one, you wait and see what happens in week 2 or week 3 of that album. Do those songs still stay there? If they do in streaming, then I'd probably deal with those songs. If they fade away, which is what happens most of the time with a lot of the songs, then you play them when they're out for the week or 2, and then don't play them again until they're singles.
So, Guy, let's take one final question, and then, of course, after that, we'll give them all the information to contact you if they want to follow up or have a specific question. Sure. This one comes from Bob Perry. He says, "Great job, Guy. What is your opinion of monitoring M scores?" And I think for our international audience, it may start off by just briefly telling people what M scores are before you share your opinion on how valuable they may or may not be.
Hey, Bob. My traveling buddy at times. I would see him all the time when I was consulting in Europe. I think M score is valuable, but you really have to use it carefully. And have to understand how to, how it trends, and you have to tag it with all the other data you're looking at as well. So I don't use it as much as I probably could, because I have all these other tools. But yes, M score can be a valuable tool. You just have to pair it up with everything else you're looking at, and you have to understand how to use it too.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to throw
that already, because that's why I asked the question.
You know what? I said that was the final, but I'm going to ask one more that just came in from Chris Schiebel, who's hanging out in Ecuador today. Because I think it's a very good way to end. Guy, is CHR in permanent doldrums, or do you see a bright future ahead for pop radio?
Oh God, what a question to end. You had to ask that, Chris. No, I don't think we're in the doldrums. I think we need to figure out how to rebound from not reacting like we should have for the past 25 years. As we talked about the last time, personality and being live, and Fred Jacobs actually talked about that today. Being live and being local, and understanding what hits to play and playing the hits and not avoiding them. All those things are important to bring this platform back, making it more relevant to an under 30 audience. So I don't think it's over yet, but I mean, the horse is out of the barn. Let's be honest. The horse is out of the barn because a lot of younger listeners aren't spending as much time with radio, not even close.
Yeah.
Well, what a webinar today, Guy. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And also want to thank our producer behind the scenes, Suzanne, who makes this all happen each time. And of course, thank you for watching. If you missed today's webinar or want to go back and access something, you can do that. It'll be posted by tomorrow on the P1 Media Group in Benstown website. So you can also find it anytime on YouTube and on our company and personal social channels. So feel free to watch it and share it with whoever you wish. If you want to reach Guy directly, you see his email on the screen, gzapoleon@aol.com. And then we're back 3 weeks from today, July 14th. We've had a lot of people ask about imaging. So here we go, Andy.
And here we are. So it's an absolute pleasure. And Ashley, if you're on, if you see that, I mean, it's long in the working. We'll have Ashley Bart, the head of sound design for Global Radio in the UK. And we'll have, I think, a tremendous webinar from imaging producers to sound designers, how Global Radio in the UK is reimagining imaging. So it's going to be an awesome thing. Ash is one of the best guys out there. So I'm really thrilled, really thrilled that Ken and I could get him on and have him on the show. July 14th, bookmark that.
Yeah. So join us for that. And then later in the summer, we've teased this one a bunch. It's finally happening.
Yep.
We're going to chat with the guys behind one of the most successful new formats over the last decade. Been #1 every quarter except 2 for the last 12 years. 102.3 Now Radio in Edmonton. Join us to find out how they have went and stayed #1 by increasing the amount of talk and personality on a music station and succeeding in a huge way. So more information on that. That one will be late August, early September. Thanks for joining us today. Again, feel free to share with anybody you like, and we hope to see you back in just a few weeks' time.
Yeah. Guy, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to learn more about music scheduling. Something I avoided my entire life, and I think I learned more from you in 90 minutes than talking to all the MDs I work with over the course of the last years.
Hey,
appreciate it so much,
guys.
Man.
Have a great one, guys.
All right. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Cheers.